Good morning. It is good to see everyone out this morning. We're down in number, but we have some on the road traveling. And I know there are many who are suffering from the flu virus, and it's good to see many who have been battling it this past week out with us this morning. I want to remember that today begins the Freed-Hardeman Lectures. Bob and Marvina, in particular, have traveled down there. Bob attended his first board meeting Friday. They'll be attending that this week and also going to see their daughter the later half of the week out in Texas. But concerning those lectures in Tennessee, if you go to Freed-Hardeman's website this week, the lectures from the Lloyd Auditorium will be streamed every day. So if those not able to make it can still have the opportunity to tune in and watch lectures at their convenience if you have the time, and encourage you to do so. Encourage you to turn over to Isaiah chapter 12 if you haven't already. We're going to be flipping back and forth through the Bible this morning. I want to take a look at something that most of us never really think of. We read through the Old Testament, we read through the prophets, and we say, well, that was a different day and a different time, and that was really not pertaining to us. Is that true? No. In Isaiah chapter 12, we find wells of salvation. A little bit of a background. Coming into this chapter, the children of Israel are leaving Babylonian captivity, coming back to God. This particular chapter, in 6 short verses, Isaiah records 2 songs of praise to God that the children of Israel sing. They sing this song to God, these songs of praise, that they are coming back to Him. And as we go through this, I want us to notice that as he begins, he says, in that day, you will say. In that day, yes, Isaiah is speaking of what the children of Israel were going through at that current time. But if we read this as Isaiah prophesies, is also pointing to the age that we currently live in. We're currently living in the Christian age. In that day, you will say, yes, the children of Israel back here are singing songs that they're saying, thank God that we are out of captivity. But we come over to the New Testament, and what should we be singing and saying praises to God for? I'm out of captivity of sin and the bondage of sin. I'm able to release myself from the hold of Satan. I'm able to be cleansed and washed in the blood of Jesus Christ. We come down to verse 3. I want us to notice that water is a metaphor of blood, is used as a metaphor of blessings to come on the remnant who believe. It was then and is now. We know the Lord is referred to as the fountain of many waters. We come over to John chapter 4, the woman at the well, Jesus tells her, whoever drinks of the water that I give will never thirst again. Now, she thought he was speaking of physical water, speaking spiritually. In John chapter 7, verses 37 through 39, there we read of Christ instituting something prior to the day of Pentecost, something that would begin on the day of Pentecost. It's a little bit of a background of what we're going to look at for just a few brief moments this morning. I want us to think about this. How can we go back and utilize Old Testament passages such as this to be a hymn of praise in our lives today? Do we do that? If not, why not? We can go back and say, we can sing these songs of praise. Lord, I'll praise you. Though you're angry with me, your anger is turned away and you comfort me. Is God angry with us? Yes. When we're disobedient? Yes. The Lord is angry. Why? He gave his only begotten Son to die on a cruel, miserable cross, as Jason referenced, while partaking of the Lord's Supper. He was beaten. He was scourged beyond recognition. Made a little lower than the angels in heaven. Yet God still allows us to be redeemed. God still allows us to come to Him. But as we get into this and we're looking at this and we think about this in verse 4 where He says, "Therefore with joy you will draw water from the wells of salvation." Does a well just exist out in the middle of nowhere? It has to be somewhere, doesn't it? It has to either be dug into the ground, it has to be coming out of a rock face, it has to be coming from somewhere. If you would turn over to 1 Corinthians, the 10th chapter. I want us to think about what Paul writes about here in 1 Corinthians chapter 10. I'm going to begin in the first verse, but our emphasis is going to be on verse 4, but I want to start at verse 1 so we have a little bit of the context of what Paul's speaking of here. He says, "Moreover, brethren, I do not want you to be unaware that all our fathers were under the cloud, that all passed under the sea, all were baptized in Moses in the cloud and in the sea, that all ate the same spiritual food, and all drank from the same spiritual rock. For they drank of that spiritual rock that followed them. That rock was Christ." I've said this before and I'll say it until my dying day. It doesn't matter if we're reading the first verse of the first chapter of the book of Genesis, or if we're reading the last verse of the book of Revelation. Jesus is prophesied. Jesus is the emphasis of everything in between, cover to cover. No matter where we look in the Bible, we see Jesus Christ, one way, shape, or form, being prophesied about or being referred to. Why is that? Because He is the one who redeems us. He is the one from whom all blessings flow. He's the one from whom salvation comes, none other. In Matthew chapter 5 and verse 6, we need to think about what Jesus says in His Sermon on the Mount. He says, "Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, they shall be filled." When we come to Jesus Christ and we decide that we're going to live in service to Him and give our lives to Him and obey Him, drink deep. Don't just walk up and say, "Okay, I'm going to get a little sip, and that's going to do me." Does that not sound like the world today? I'm just going to get just what pacifies me. No. What do you do when you're thirsty? You get a glass of water, and do you just take a couple sips out of it and you say, "I'm satisfied"? No. You pick that glass up and you drink it till it's empty. And then what do? You go back and you refill. Now, we have city water supplies today for the majority of us. But now I want to rewind a little bit. And the younger children in here may not fully understand what I'm referring to, but not so many years ago, everyone had a well. And if you dug a well, sometimes you found a source that was contaminated. And if it was contaminated, you left it. You dug a new well. You went to a new spring. You found water that was good, that was not contaminated, that would allow you to partake of it, and it would keep you healthy. There's only one source that we ought to be drinking deep from, and that's Jesus Christ. When we think about pure water, we can go back to Jeremiah chapter 17. The 13th verse there, Jeremiah records, he says, "O Lord, the hope of Israel, all who forsake you shall be ashamed. Those who depart from you shall be written in the earth, because they have forsaken the Lord, the fountain of living waters." They have forsaken the Lord Yahweh, Jehovah God, the God of heaven, the creator of earth and everything we know, is the fountain of living waters. Think of this. A fountain of living waters. And it comes from the Lord. It's pure. We ought to be drinking deep on it. Drink so much that it consumes your all in all. Nothing else can be in there. What happens when we're sick and we're right in the middle of the cold and flu season? Doctor tell you to drink lots of water. Why? What does it do for the body? It hydrates it and does what else? It flushes out the impurities. Us, if we're drinking deep from the pure waters of the fountain of life, that is Jesus Christ, we fill and it consumes our body and it flushes out the impurities of sin. It allows us to be cleansed, to be purified from the inside out, which is the way we ought to be healed. And we're going to take a look at that this evening, of how the tongue can be a source of death to us. But when we think of this fountain of this well of salvation that comes from the Lord, the fountain of life, He's abundant, He's free-flowing, He's never-ending. There's never an end to it. And when we come down to the thing of looking how Jesus is the fountain of it, Jeremiah in chapter 2, verse 13, he says, "My people committed two evils. They have forsaken me, the fountain of living waters, and they've hewn in themselves cisterns, broken cisterns that can hold no water." Every system we look at that is man-made, what is it? It's broken. It's a broken system. As Jeremiah says, they've hewn in themselves cisterns, broken cisterns that hold no water. We can't hear it. We can't. Where do we find cisterns that will hold water? We find it by reading the Word of God. Where do we find pure water? By coming to the Lord, by partaking of the wells of salvation that are found only in Him. Now, Christ is the fountain of blessing, the fountain for cleansing. And we can find this in Zechariah chapter 13, verse 1, over in 1 John chapter 1, verse 7. But Matthew records in the 26th chapter of his book, in the 28th verse, he records Jesus saying this, "For this is my blood of the new covenant, which is shed for many, for the remission of sins." He's a fountain of blessing. Is that not a blessing for us to be able to know that the blood that Jesus Christ shed willingly for you and for me is a blessing? How could such a scourging, how could such a beating, how could such ridicule be such a blessing? It wasn't for the Lord. The Son had to go through all that anguish and physical suffering in the form of a man. The Father had to go through the anguish of seeing His only Son given as a sacrifice. Yet He did it. There's only one well of salvation revealed in the gospel. Only one. And that's Jesus Christ. If you attempt to show any other, it's not going to show up. If you make an attempt to add anything into it, it's not going to show up. We read over in the book of Revelation toward the end of the book, whoever adds to the things that are written in this book, the plagues of the book will be added to them. And if you take away from the things that were written in this book, what will happen? Your name will be taken away from the Lamb's book of life. I don't want either one of those. I don't want to have the punishment that comes along with adding to the Lord's word, and I surely don't want my name taken out of the Lamb's book of life. Either one of those as a sentence of eternal condemnation. Brother Marshall Keeble would say in his sermons, there's water in the plan. And there is. We were talking about wells of salvation, that we come, we drink of the waters of life that come from the Father and come from the Lord, that we drink spiritually. But do we not have physical water that is required of us to go into to be immersed for the forgiveness of our sins. 1 Peter chapter 3, beginning verse 18, Peter makes the correlation between the flood of Noah, that there's now, in like manner, antitype, that is baptism, not the putting away the filth of the flesh, but the answer of a good conscience to God. Not because I'm physically dirty. It's me doing what the Lord has told me to do, because I'm filling myself full of His Word from the wells of salvation where they ought to be coming from. We need to realize that grace is not grace until it's accepted. Before I get to the point that's on the screen right now, I want us to realize that God's grace only comes to us when we accept it. What does Mark chapter 16 and verse 16, what does Mark record there? He says, "He who believes and is baptized will be saved. He who does not believe will be condemned." We have to believe. If we don't believe, we're not going to be baptized. He didn't have to go on and elaborate and give everything step by step. When he says, "He who believes and is baptized will be saved," but he who does not believe, if I don't believe, I'm not going to get wet. I'm not going to go down that water grave of baptism because I don't believe in this. It's the same as if I lay a $100 bill in this pulpit and I tell someone, the only thing you have to do is get up from your seat right now, walk up here without saying a word to anyone, pick that $100 bill up, fold it in half, place it in your right pocket of your pants, in your right pants pocket, walk back and sit down and not say a word to anyone. Simple, isn't it? What would happen if the person that I chose would come up very silently, do as they had been told, picked it up, folded it in half, placed it in their right pants pocket, walk back to their seat, and they get one step away and they speak to someone? Have they not breached the agreement that was made? I have the right to take that back. Same goes with God's grace. He doesn't say do it up to where it's comfortable for you. He says do it until your dying day. Do it unto death. Revelation chapter 2 verse 10, in the last half of that verse, Jesus says, "Be thou faithful unto death, and I will give you a crown of life." He doesn't say be thou faithful until it suits you and you'll still get a crown of life. He says be thou faithful unto death, up to and into physical death. Be faithful. And the last point here is Christ's blessings are from the wells of salvation. We can see this over in Ephesians chapter 1 and verse 3. Grace and mercy are offerings of salvation from our sins. Christ's blessings are from the well of salvation. We know that part of the blessings that come from Him are faith, hope, and love. 1 Corinthians chapter 13, the 13th verse, I'm hoping we could all recite that one. Faith, hope, and love are three things He gave us, but what is the greatest? It's love. These three things carry us on our journey through this life, but when we come to the end and the close of life's day, it doesn't matter how you've lived. You better be in service to your Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ, because faith and hope will cease to be a necessity. As a faithful child of God, when you step out into eternity, the love of God is still with you. The Lord knows you're there. If you're in an unsaved state, you're in a lost state, you step out from this life into eternity, you know immediately where you are bound. and an eternal death, the Lord ceases to remember you. That's scary. That ought to be terrifying. Be enough to motivate us to live faithfully, and be motivation enough to go out and spread the gospel to the community around us. We can also read of the fruits of the Spirit in Galatians chapter 5, verses 22 and 23. And they're also reiterated in 2 Peter chapter 1, where he goes on to elaborate somewhat how it makes us morally and spiritually pure. We need to be thinking about this. Are we drawing from the wells of salvation today? Are we going to Jesus Christ? Are we pulling from these wells? Are we able to do, as Isaiah wrote of back in his 12th chapter of his book, to sing songs of praise, to sing these hymns of praise to God? In that day you will say, praise the Lord, call upon his name, declare his deeds among the peoples, make mention that his name is exalted, sing to the Lord, for he has done excellent things. This is known in all the earth. Cry out and shout, O inhabitant of Zion, for great is the Holy One of Israel in your midst. We're living in the new Israel. We are God's chosen people, his church. We talk about being washed and cleansed. Our invitation song has, Have You Been to Jesus? Or also known as, Have You Been Washed in the Blood? Where does that blood come from? It comes from Jesus Christ. Where does all that stem back from? It comes from the Lord, the Father, the source of the waters of life that we ought to be partaking of. They're pure, they're undefiled. They'll take sin and corruption out of your life. As I started out, drink deep. Don't be afraid to, if you're not drinking of that fountain yet. Today's the day to start. As Paul said in 2 Corinthians chapter 6 and verse 2, behold, today is the day. Today is the day of salvation. Why not begin your walk with the Lord today, mending a broken heart, mending a broken spirit, washing yourself. Be washed as white as snow. Be spiritually healthy. The front seats are open. We stand with open arms. Facilities are ready. We invite you to come while together we stand and sing.